If you're not a confident Portuguese speaker and you're visiting Portugal or even planning to move here, you will for sure need to visit a supermarket to grab groceries or essentials. And unlike restaurants or hotels, this might be a place where people who work there don't speak as much English. And if they're speaking Portuguese, they're speaking it fast. If you can't keep up with them, you get that look that says, you're not from around here. So in this video, I'm covering every phrase you need to confidently walk into a supermarket in Portugal, get what you need, handle the checkout, and walk out without constantly opening Google Translate or feeling awkward and embarrassed every time someone speaks to you. I'm going to show you both sides of the conversation, what to say and how to respond back, because knowing a phrase is useless if you can't understand the response. So we're going to start with a part of the supermarket that nobody prepares you for. So in a lot of Portuguese supermarkets, especially the bigger, for example, Pingo Doce or Continente, there are specific counters for fresh meat and fish. Now, a lot of tourists don't realize this, but these counters have a ticket machine where you need to pull a number and wait for your turn. So if you see one of these, take a number first or you're going to be waiting for a long time. The ticket is called a senha. Now, once you have your ticket, it's going to be important to know what to say. So here is an example first sentence. Queria 1 quilo de peito de frango, se faz favor. So this is, I would like 1 kilo of chicken breast, please. So let's break this down because there is a lot packed into this one sentence. Queria is the polite way to say I would like in Portuguese. If you saw my last video, you will already know this one. So not quero, that's more direct and it can sound a bit too blunt. So next, the quantities. Everything at the counter is going to be measured in grams and kilos, so you need to know a few numbers. I do have a video on numbers. If you haven't checked it out yet, this should help a lot with the supermarket scenario. So some example quantities would be 100 gramas, 100 grams. Now, I want you to notice that 100 is a word that ends in an M, and this is one of the times where, if you've seen my videos, you might know this rule by now. Instead of pronouncing the M at the end, we're going to nasalize the vowel that goes before it instead. This is the rule for any word that ends in an M in Portuguese. So practice saying it with me and make it nice and nasal. 100. Same. You can of course switch out the number for however many grams you want. Then next up we have meio quilo, half a kilo. Meio quilo. And then of course if you want a whole kilo, it's simply quilo. Now it's important to note that when we see a QUI in Portuguese, we are not going to pronounce that U, okay? We're not going to say qua, it's just a K sound. This is different to if you see a QUA in Portuguese, we are going to hear that U sound. Qua, quando, quanto, for example. So now you have these basic building blocks, you can build your own sentence with whatever it is that you want to buy. So for example, queria meio quilo de chouriço, se faz favor. So once you've learned the structure of this sentence, you can order anything, anywhere in Portugal. And not just supermarkets, of course, this works in shops, bakeries, everywhere. After you order, they will weigh it and look up at you to check that the amount is right. So here are some things that you can answer. So they might be just a little bit over or a little bit under the quantity that you ask for. And they might say, está bom assim? Is it okay like this? And you could answer one of two things. If you would like more, you could say, mais bocadinho. Mais bocadinho. Bocadinho is a very Portuguese way of saying little bit. If you add inho or inha onto the end of anything, you're making the diminutive, so you're making something a little bit smaller. Or you could say, chega. That's enough, okay? If they've weighed just a little bit over or just a little bit under and you're happy with that, you can say chega. Now the CH is pronounced like a sh, okay? Lots of people will look at that and use the English ch, but that's not what we're looking for in Portuguese. It's going to be sh, chega, enough. So let's put that all together and see how it would work in real life communication, because this is what it's going to actually sound like. Queria 1 quilo de peito de frango, se faz favor. Está bom assim? Mais bocadinho. Assim? Chega, obrigada. Mais alguma coisa? É tudo, obrigada. Now, you've probably noticed that Portuguese pronunciation can catch you a little bit off guard sometimes. There are nasal sounds, closed vowels, a lot of things to remember. And honestly, that's the #1 reason why people freeze up when they try to speak. So I have made a 100% free pronunciation guide that covers the 7 hardest sounds in Portuguese with native speaker audio. So if you want people to actually understand you when you use these phrases, grab it using the first link in the description. So on to phrase number 4. Let's talk about finding things in the supermarket. Let's say you want to get some frozen food, but you don't know where the frozen food aisle is. You could ask, com licença, onde fica o corredor dos congelados? Excuse me, where is the frozen aisle? Now, the really important word to get right here is corredor, which means aisle. And this is a really tricky one to say because it has that double R in the middle. Now, we have 2 options for this in Portuguese. It can be a R or a H. I tell my students it doesn't matter which you use. Do the one that comes most naturally to you, but you do need to be consistent with using it, okay? So I use the H, so I will say corredor. Now, it's important also to put the stress on the end. There are a few letters of the alphabet where if a word ends in one of these letters, it tells us to put the stress there, and R is one of these letters. So I'm going to have to say corredor and really stress the ending. I have made another video on how to know when to stress which syllable in a word. I'll also link this video in the description as well for you to check out next. So then, of course, you just swap out the ending for whatever section that you need. So, for example, onde fica o corredor das bebidas? And the response is usually pretty easy to follow. They'll either point or give you a number. Another reason why you need to study your numbers. Now, next up, we have one that's quick but important. Again, in a lot of the big chain Portuguese supermarkets, you might have to weigh your own fruit and vegetables on a self-service scale and then stick the price label on the bag before going to the checkout. Not every store has them, but some do. And if you skip this part, the cashier will send you back to go and do it. So you might hear, tem de pesar na balança. You need to weigh it on the scale. If you can't find the scale, you could ask, onde é a balança? Balança is scale and onde is where. So once you know that word, balança, you are pretty sorted. So just remember to check whether you need to weigh your stuff before heading to the checkout. So speaking of the checkout, once you have finished your shopping, this is of course the most important part. The cashier is probably going to fire off several questions in a row pretty fast. And if you've not heard them before, you might have no idea what's happening. So let me walk you through exactly what they will say and how to respond. The first one is going to be Quer fatura com contribuinte? This is probably the single most confusing phrase for anybody who is new to Portugal. So the translation to this is, do you want the receipt with your tax number on it? Quer comes from the verb querer, to want. Fatura is your receipt or invoice. And then the contribuinte is your tax number, also called your NIF. Now, my students do struggle to say this word normally, contribuinte, so let's break it down. The con is going to have a nice nasal O because that's how vowel sounds before an N. We're then going to have tri, you have to do a little tapped R in the middle there. Tri, really put some force behind your tongue. Then we have the BU. Lots of people want to say bia because that's what we would do in English. But in Portuguese, a U is just an U sound. So think about being scared by a ghost. Bu. Contribuinte, nice and easy. And then t. When words end in an E in Portuguese, it's actually going to be a closed E. Even though so many people want to say e. Contribuinte. That's not what we're going to do with European Portuguese, so just remember to close it down. So practice with me. Contribuinte. So the more cultural question is, why do they ask this? Because in Portugal, when you give your NIF at the checkout, those purchases get registered to your tax profile, and then you can claim deductions when you file your taxes. So another really helpful thing to do is to have your NIF memorized. They are going to be 9 digits. And again, this is where your numbers are going to come in handy. Of course, if you're just visiting, you may not have all of these numbers yet, in which case you would say, não, obrigada, or obrigado, depending on who's talking. I always tell my students to drill their NIF, and sometimes this means that they actually can't even remember how to say them in English because they're so used to saying them in Portuguese. That's how deeply this stuff gets wired in when you actually practice. So, the final question may be, quanto é? Quanto é? You might need to say this if you've scanned in all of your items and the cashier said the number so fast of how much it was going to cost and you need them to repeat it. You can ask, quanto é? How much is it? So again, you're noticing there that QUA, we are hearing the U this time. Qua, quanto. Now you might already know the phrase quanto custa, which means how much does it cost, but this is more used for asking the price of a single item before you buy it, so in local markets or shops, for example. But quanto é is different because we're adding up lots of things and we need to know how much the total is. Another question you could ask if you don't catch it is, pode repetir, por favor? Now you might have noticed that I used that h sound again. This is because we also use it when a word begins with an R. So beginning with an R or a double R is going to be that h sound, or if you find it easier to do a trill, a r, you can use that as well. So now it's time to finish off at the checkout. They might ask, tem cartão de cliente? Do you have a loyalty card? Now, you might have noticed another nasal sound there, not just the word ending in M, tem, but also the end of cartão. We're also going to use nasal sounds when we see that squiggly line. It's called a tilde above a vowel. And be careful not to pronounce this client. Of course, that's how we say it in English, client, but in Portuguese, it's going to be an E sound. That's what we use for the letter I. Cliente. And close that E down at the end, like I mentioned before. Of course, these are useful to use because they can give you points and money off, but most of you watching this probably won't have one if you haven't moved here yet. So you can simply say, não tenho. There's that nasal sound again because we saw another tilde accent, right? Não tenho. But maybe you do, in which case you can say, tenho sim. Aqui está. Yes, I do. Here it is. So we're almost at the end. We just need to pay. You have a few methods of doing this, of course. You could use contactless. Now, this sounds really weird to say in like a Portuguese accent, but any kind of new technology is probably just going to borrow the word from English. So if you want to use your contactless credit or debit card, you can say contactless. Pago com contactless. Another option is MBWay. Now, this is the mobile payment system in Portugal. Again, you're going to need a Portuguese bank account and mobile phone number, so it's unlikely you'd be using this one straight away, but it's good to know that it exists for the future. A lot of smaller shops will also take this as well, so that is really useful. If you haven't set it up yet, it is worth doing. And then of course you can pay in cash, though that's pretty unusual these days, especially in a big supermarket. But you could say, vou pagar em dinheiro, in cash, em dinheiro. The cashier might even ask, cartão ou dinheiro, card or cash. Then the final hurdle is whether you need a bag or not. So maybe you forgot your reusable bag and you've got a huge pile of groceries with nothing to put them in. You can say, preciso de saco, se faz favor. I need a bag, please. In Portugal, bags are chargeable now, so they probably won't hand you one automatically. You do need to ask for them, or they might ask if you need one. So if you enjoyed this lesson and you want to actually start having real conversations in Portugal, then do sign up for my free workshop, Speak Portuguese Like a Pro. It's a free training built for total beginners that covers tips to master pronunciation, real life Portuguese, and the essential grammar that you actually need to get to a conversational level. The link in the description will take you straight there. And if you want to see some of these phrases in action, I did this video a while back where I took my friend Michelle shopping at the supermarket. You'll watch her use some of these phrases and have a real back and forth conversation with the shopkeepers. Just click here to watch it.